I really believe we already know how to be great. And that hope or dream that there's a best self, and I think we all have that hope or dream that there's a best self lurking somewhere inside us, never even got started with me. And because I grew up believing I was not great. And it began because when I was 18 months old, I was in hospital with an ear infection, and the staff thought that I had measles, so they put me in isolation for a week. And I could only see my mom and dad through a window in the door, and apparently I cried a lot. And when I came out, I was painfully withdrawn, severely asthmatic. I wasn't able to play sports for years, and I spent about half of my time unable to go to school. But I don't remember a lot about that. I do remember vividly an experience I had when I was 11 years old. And that experience shaped the rest of my life. My elder brother entered me in my school's tennis tournament. This is back in Wales, where I was raised. Now, I'd never played tennis in my life before that. But I found myself in the final playing against someone that I remember as the school hormone freak. Because this is a 13-year-old. He's already 6 foot tall. He's got facial hair. He's captain of our school rugby team. This is our school jock. And we start playing, and I'm just putting one foot in front of the other, doing the best I can. And after an hour, I find myself 6'4", 4-love in the lead. And this voice started talking to me. It was a voice in my head. And it said, "Alan, you've already won 10 games. You only have to win 2 more, and you're going to be the school champion." And I froze. I never won another game. And instead of focusing on the ball, I now focused on this conversation going on in my head. And the harder I tried, the worse I got. And the worse I got, the harder I tried. I knew what to do. I would never have got in the lead if I didn't know what to do. But I couldn't do what I knew. And that experience set me off on a journey to try and understand what was it that was going on inside me and how do I deal with it. Because I quickly realized that voice showed up everywhere in my life. And I've now come to believe that the biggest obstacle to performance isn't knowing what to do. It's doing what we know. It's taking action on things that we already know about. And not doing what we know shows up everywhere in our lives. How many of you, before you came here today, already knew of one thing that if you were to do a little more of it or a little less of it, you would be more effective? So obviously it's not a knowledge issue for you. How many of you parents in here have said yes to that child that you adore so much when they nag you for that sugary treat, knowing that in about an hour you're going to regret having said yes because you've got to peel them off their brother or sister from that sugar high? How many of, again, it's you know what you need to do, but you're not taking action on it. And this, sometimes I think it's an obsession that we have. We get caught up in this illusion that there's some piece of knowledge that if I can just get my hands on that knowledge, then I'm going to be able to get at my greatness. I'm going to have a breakthrough in what I do. And yet there's so much knowledge that we already possess that we're not taking action on. So I've come to think about it this way, that there's, if we think of a wheel of performance or a wheel of greatness, and we make knowledge the rim of that wheel, then what we tend to do by habit or by education is we look to increase the thickness of the rim of that wheel when we try to be better. Sometimes we can make it so thick, the wheel gets so heavy it won't even turn. We get lost and bogged down in that knowledge. And if knowledge was all it took, we'd all read the book and we'd all be world champions at whatever we wanted to be. There has to be some other components, and to me there are three other critical components. And I call them faith, and fire, and focus. Faith is what you believe about yourself and your abilities. Fire is all about energy, passion, and commitment. And focus is about what we pay attention to. And these all influence each other, because what we focus on is what creates our beliefs. And a lot of that happens in our early years. And once we have a belief, that directs and filters what we focus on. And if you can get those pointed in the right direction, it will raise the fire and it'll make learning and using knowledge much easier. And if we get them pointed in the wrong direction, well, it'll lower fire or make learning and using knowledge much more difficult. And the one that really seems to drive this wheel is focus. Focus seems to drive everything that we do. What we pay attention to drives everything that we do. So, what then stops us from doing what we know, from using this knowledge that we have? I call it interference, mental interference, and I think about it this way, that our greatness equals our focus, plus our faith, plus our fire, plus the knowledge we have, minus this interference. And this mental interference is that internal dialogue that goes on in our minds constantly. It's what was going on in me on the tennis court, saying I only needed to win 2 more games and I would be the champion. And interference starts in us at a very young age. You know how kids have, how they learn so fast and they seem to have an insatiable curiosity? So imagine that Mum's sitting here on this stool and she's reading this book. And so and I'm the 1-year-old child, I'm her 1-year-old child, and I see her reading this book, and you know what? It captures my attention. I'm curious, so I'll take the book away from her, and I'll explore it in the way that kids do. Hasn't it got great colors? It makes great noises. It feels all right. It even tastes good. And then I'll get bored with it, and I'll go and get interested in something else. Then I'll get bored with that, and I'll go back to the book and try and take it away from Mum, who's still trying to read it. And I'll move on to something else again. Imagine that happening 4 times. The 5th time I go back to Mum, who's still trying to read this, what will she do? She goes, "No! I'm reading it!" And that becomes the first emotionally scarring experience of my little life. My key place of safety in the world is terrorizing me. But you still can't shut down my curiosity. I'm going to go back, but this next time I go back, I'm in watch-out mode. Is she going to get me or isn't she? And when people go into watch-out mode, it starts to block their faith, fire, and focus, because watch-out mode is interference. I'm running into what is perhaps one of our greatest fears, and that's my fear of being judged, my fear that Mum is going to withhold her love from me. Interference, watch-out mode, shuts down our faith, our fire, and our focus. And I believe it shuts down the most powerful faculty that we have as human beings, and that's our ability to learn. So, what can we do to access this greatness that we have in us? Well, I believe it's there in what we already know. Earlier I said, focus drives everything that we do. So here's a blinding glimpse of the obvious. We're always focused on something. You know, if you read a good book, if you get lost in a good book or a good movie, you're focused. Or a good video game, you're focused. The key is, do we focus on the interference, or do we focus on what's actually happening, on the present? See, when you play your sports well one day and poorly the next, or when you play your musical instrument well one day and poorly the next, it's not a knowledge issue. The knowledge hasn't changed. It's a focus issue. When our kids are smart enough to get good grades but don't, or when they do their chores one day and not the next, that's not a knowledge issue. That's a focus issue. And here's a scary statistic for you. By one estimate, in US hospitals, 195,000 people die every year from preventable errors. That's 390 jumbo jets, by the way. From preventable errors, from errors that we have the knowledge to prevent. It's not a knowledge issue. It's a focus, a what we pay attention to issue. What we focus on creates our beliefs, and what we believe ignites our fire. So I'd invite you to think about a couple of questions when you're playing, when you're investigating, accessing your greatness or trying to help somebody else get at theirs. First of all, is it really a knowledge issue, or could it be a faith, fire, and focus issue that they're wrestling with? And secondly, in the way you go about trying to access your greatness, do you create interference or do you reduce it? By focusing beyond the interference, that's really how we can get out of watch-out mode. And I've now come to believe that I also already know how to be great. And I got to that because I've been lucky enough to have some people in my life who made it safe for me to explore how I choose what to focus on. And so ultimately, I've come to believe that the finest service we can give another human being or ourselves is to make it safe for them to explore their own experience, to explore what they focus on. Because that's where transformations and breakthroughs happen, and that's why we already know how to be great. Thank you.